Morgan Freeman is the eternal legend of Hollywood, and for more than 6 decades he has shown us what resilience, dignity, and truth really mean on the screen. From the dusty roads of Mississippi, he rose all the way to winning Academy Awards, proving that greatness has no deadline, that it doesn't matter where you start, and that destiny always rewards people who never give up. Just hearing his name is enough to bring back memories of the calm narration that carried us through despair and redemption, the voice that comforted an entire generation in its darkest hours, and the presence that turned simple roles into eternal lessons about humanity. But behind that dazzling mountain of glory lies a deep pit that few people dare to face: 2 broken marriages with fierce fights, a car accident that nearly killed him and left permanent scars, accusations that surrounded him, and bitter failures in both business and career, all carved into wounds that have never truly closed. Now at the age of 88, which scars still burn with pain and which sorrows still cling tightly to him? It's heartbreaking to imagine that the man whose voice would one day steady the world began his life in hunger, silence, and abandonment, a small boy forced to survive before he ever dared to dream. Morgan Freeman entered this world on June 1, 1937 in Memphis, Tennessee, the youngest of 5 children born to Mamie Edna and Morgan Porterfield Freeman. His mother took on long hours in modest jobs, scrubbing floors and working as a nurse's aide, while his father struggled to keep a small barber shop alive. Their paychecks barely stretched far enough to cover rent, let alone fill the table for 5 hungry children. Poverty wasn't just a condition, it was the constant shadow in their lives. Freeman would later admit that he remembered nights when hunger was louder than sleep, nights when the emptiness in his stomach felt heavier than the blanket on his back. He grew up knowing that food was uncertain, that safety was fragile, and that the world gave no guarantees. When work pulled his parents north to Chicago in search of opportunity, Morgan was left behind in Charleston, Mississippi, to be raised by his grandmother. That creaking wooden house with its porch sagging under the southern heat became both refuge and prison. The boy would sit alone on that porch as church choirs sang in the distance, wondering why his parents were far away and why the world felt so cold. A battered suitcase became his closest companion as the family drifted from Mississippi to Indiana to Illinois and back again, never long enough in one place to belong. Each move meant a new schoolyard, new stairs, new whispers, and each time he was the outsider, the poor boy, the one who had less. Freeman later reflected that he knew what it meant to be left behind, and that cruel knowledge hardened into the quiet steel that would one day define his presence. The South of the 1940s and 1950s was merciless to a young black boy. Segregation cut across every street corner and every school desk, branding him as less before he ever had a chance to prove he was more. At school the sting of inequality was daily: books that were old and torn, classrooms that were neglected, and the unspoken message that children like him were not expected to rise. The humiliation of walking past whites, only signs carved deep into him, teaching him early about the injustice of the world. He would later speak against such limitations, saying that his history could not be squeezed into a single month because his very life was proof of endurance beyond labels. Yet even in that harsh soil a spark flickered. At 9 years old he stood on a school stage for the very first time. The play was modest, the audience small, the applause scattered, but for him it was a revelation. In that single moment under the dim glow of classroom lights, the loneliness cracked. He felt seen, if only for an instant, and that instant became survival. Acting wasn't just performance, it was proof that his presence mattered, that his voice could cut through silence, that he had something to give the world. Freeman would later recall that he told himself even as a child, "This is what I want and this is who I am." That fragile spark carried him through years of emptiness and uncertainty, whispering that even in the darkest places hope can be born. But life wasn't finished testing him. In 1961, when Freeman was only 24, his father died from cirrhosis. For a son who had grown up half in his absence, the death was still a wound that cut to the core. It wasn't just the loss of a parent, it was the final confirmation that life could take more than it would ever give. He once described it as a silence deeper than hunger, a silence that reminded him that even family could be taken in an instant. The hunger of his childhood, the loneliness of being left behind, the humiliation of segregation, and now the loss of his father, these were scars that never fully healed. And yet they didn't destroy him, they forged him. Those wounds became the raw material of his strength, the quiet dignity that would one day make audiences lean in whenever he spoke, the humanity that would color every word of his narration. The boy who had once known hunger, silence, and exclusion grew into the man whose voice defined generations. The hunger taught gratitude, the absence taught empathy, the injustice taught resilience, and the loss taught him that life was fragile and that presence mattered more than promises. And from those forgotten roads of Mississippi, carved out of poverty, silence, and sorrow, emerged a legend not in spite of the pain but because of it. It's almost cruel to realize that even after a childhood of hunger and loneliness, the world demanded even more suffering before granting Morgan Freeman a place to stand. Barely out of high school with no money for college and no safety net, he sought refuge in the United States Air Force. The uniform gave him order, and for a while he dreamed of piloting fighter jets, but when he finally sat in the cockpit staring at the instruments, a truth struck deep, and it wasn't his destiny. He realized he wasn't meant to kill, he would later admit, so he walked away from stability and stepped into uncertainty, trading the discipline of the military for the chaos of chasing a dream that offered no guarantees. Los Angeles was merciless. Freeman enrolled at the Pasadena Playhouse to study acting, but tuition was a burden he could scarcely carry. To survive, he worked at Los Angeles City College as a transcript clerk, typing by day and rehearsing by night. His paychecks vanished into rent, scraps of food, and train fare. Some nights his dinner was nothing more than stale bread and coffee so weak it was little more than tinted water. More than once he fell asleep on a wooden chair in a rented room, his hunger louder than sleep. He knew hunger, and he knew what it was like to live with nothing, he later reflected, but rather than break him, those hollow nights forged a quiet resilience that would become his signature strength. Rejection greeted him at every turn. Casting directors dismissed him before he opened his mouth, sometimes refusing even to meet his eyes. His skin color was often enough to end an audition before it began. The humiliation was sharp, echoing the segregated Mississippi he had left behind. So he drifted between Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, always chasing the faint promise of work. In San Francisco he danced in chorus lines, sweating under stage lights for applause that barely paid the rent. In New York he stood in endless lines, audition after audition, each no pressing down like a stone. There were nights when surrender whispered to him, but he silenced it with a vow. He would starve if he must, but he would act. By the time his first film appeared he was already well into his 30s, an age when many actors had either succeeded or given up. Who Says I Can't Ride a Rainbow in 1971 came and went without notice, his name lost in the credits. Television brought survival rather than glory. He landed small roles, first in soap operas like Another World and later throughout the 1970s as a regular on the Electric Company. For him it was grueling work, long days for modest pay, but to millions of children he became a familiar face, unknowingly planting the seeds of a presence that would one day feel eternal. It was the stage, however, that became his true sanctuary. Across the 1980s Freeman delivered performances that earned him Obie Awards, Coriolanus, The Gospel at Colonus, and Driving Miss Daisy, yet even these triumphs felt quiet, tucked away from Hollywood's glare. He was building his reputation brick by brick in theaters where only the most devoted fans of drama would notice. Each ovation reminded him that greatness was not measured by speed but by endurance. By then Freeman had weathered 2 decades of poverty, rejection, and invisibility, but instead of vanishing he endured, and that endurance became his true weapon. Greatness did not arrive with applause or riches. It arrived in the silence he refused to surrender, in the battles he fought when no one was watching. From the wooden porch of Mississippi to the wooden chairs of rented rooms, Morgan Freeman built a voice that would one day steady the world. His rise wasn't luck, it was destiny carved from pain.